Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of my Meet the Candidate events. I've been running all the way through this kind of election period, although of course, as it's turned out, I've had so many interesting guests. It's actually been Meet the Candidate, Meeting the Candidate, and I've got another excellent candidate on tonight who will be known so well to you all, Fiona Hyslop, who of course has been serving as a Cabinet Secretary for Economy, Fair Work and Culture, and will be well known to everybody who's been involved in the SNP from literally years ago. So good evening, thanks for coming on the show, Fiona.
Hello, Michelle, nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm great, yeah, doing well. I've been busy today out in Grangemouth and Bo'ness and doing some visits, so probably like you, things are really quite busy now.
Yeah, I was actually in Broxburn and Bathgate and also Armadale today, and obviously watching the manifesto launch this morning. So a lot I think we can talk about this evening.
Oh, I mean, you know, in some respects, it's almost like where do we start? I mean, these kind of traditional manifesto launches, and you'll know better than me, the way it seems to work is that, you know, the top lines are pre-trailed and are already almost known until the manifesto launch takes place. And quite often it means that they can be a damp squib. But I have to say, I was absolutely blown away by the manifesto, the depth, the range, the content, absolutely seriously impressive and visionary. And I was really delighted to see how much work had gone into it.
Well, it's your manifesto, you're the candidate, you'll be promoting it. So I think we can all embrace it. And I think it also shows that the SNP not only have got that experienced leadership, we also have that strong policy programme for recovery and have ideas. And because we have ambition for Scotland, we're never satisfied with where things are, and that means there's always room for improvement. There's always ideas, new policies to take forward. So I think it's implicit in our DNA that we will always strive more for Scotland, and we're not complacent. We're always earning votes, but we're also, most importantly, putting forward a prospectus that takes us through recovery, but also has an eye to where Scotland needs to be. And so therefore, the arguments particularly about the position of Scotland as an independent nation is absolutely central to recovery. And I think the First Minister this morning put it very well. And if MD who's watching hasn't seen that, I think there should be hopefully an uploaded version of her speech on the SNP website.
Yeah, and I think it came through so strongly, the messaging about Scotland's future, Scotland's choice, of course, the key strapline, but also within the manifesto, it shows both choices we're making in policy terms just now and choices we'd like to be able to make and why we care. You know, and I guess we'll come on to some of these as we start to have our discussion. But I suppose the first question I'd ask you then, if you were to pick 3 areas that you think, well, I'm so proud about this, and tell the people who are listening, because I think we should both bear in mind that there'll be many people listening this evening who haven't managed to catch up with the manifesto and missed the event, and, you know, would probably kind of want to like start at the beginning. So let's do that. So top 3 things then.
So from my point of view, I think the real striking feature of the manifesto is about compassion and care and the type of country you want to be. So my first area I'd probably go into is tackling inequalities. And we know that if you really want to tackle equality and promote equality in education, you've got to tackle inequalities in life. And I think COVID has taught us anything. We knew that there was a challenge before. We have, over the last period, put funding into the Attainment Fund to try and help close that gap between the achievements and that we know young people are capable of, but sometimes the poverty can hold people back, and so therefore we've already made changes there and closed the attainment gap for National 5s by a third. And also in terms of those that are leaving school to positive destinations by a 5th. But there's so much more to do. And I think COVID really showed the challenges there. So for me in the manifesto, clearly the free school meals for P1 to P7, breakfast clubs, as well as lunches, as well as during the holidays. Many years ago, I was the minister that actually piloted the free school meals when we were first introducing them to P1 to P3. So I'm particularly proud that we're doing that. But also the point, and I know it'll be of interest to you as well, is knowing that the financial outlays that some parents have to put out for whether it's arts materials or home economics, and for me, music is a concern. And to have that as free and being provided for by the government, I think will be a game changer. And then you layer on that some of the other policies in there. For example, on active travel, we might get to that at some point, but many youngsters just don't have access to a bike. So if you can't afford to have, your family can't afford to buy you a bike, when you're at school age, the government's going to help with that. Now that's important for so many different reasons, and also helping people, be able to ride a bike safely when they leave school. The child payment, tackling poverty, doubling of that, I think is a game changer, even at the £20 level. But that moving that to the increase of that, I think is going to be really important. Doubling the child payment. So my first area would probably be tackling poverty. The other area that I'm really enthusiastic about is on the enterprise agenda, as you would expect as the economy secretary, and one that I was very keen to see in there was how we promote more women owning businesses. There's currently only 20% of businesses are owned by women, so actually that can be a game changer in what we need to try and do and tackling there. And then the third area, which again is probably my area of interest, particularly in the economy, is what we're doing in terms of green jobs. 100 million for hydrogen investment, additional 100 million for green jobs, and the skills that we can have in terms of that just transition that we need. So some of these were known before the manifesto was published, and others won't. And I suppose I'm going to give you a fourth one that I wasn't expecting, but I was very pleasantly surprised, was the abolition of dental charges in the NHS, which is again about that principle that we've tried to pursue all the way through, that there should be free, as a government since 2007, that there should be free access to the NHS at the point of need. And obviously, we've abolished prescription charges, we've done other aspects, but actually that, dental aspect, it was really important, because we also think that it'll mean that more people come forward. We saw that when we did it with eye tests, for example, when we made eye tests free, that more people came forward. So that's preventative as well as anything else. So that's probably my three areas. It's a broad brush, but if people haven't caught up with the manifesto, that hopefully will give them a sense and a flavour that we are ambitious, we're bold, we're brimming full of ideas, and there's something in there that I think everybody could identify with as being the type of Scotland that they want to see.
And you touch on something there, because we will dig a little bit deeper into each one of these. I suppose what the sense it gave to me was, rather than saying we value X, Y, Z, we value our young people, for example, it's clearly demonstrating value, like we value them by giving to them and embedding those things. So the attainment gap, starting to try and really challenge child poverty by taking real affirmative action, jumped out so clearly to me. And I think it's absolutely values driven all the way through, about what we value in our society, how we are different. And that's some of it. It's the golden thread of our DNA that actually has always been in SNP policies, but more so than ever this time has jumped out quite clearly. And I don't know if that's your sense as well.
Absolutely, and I think the point, particularly of the number of policies that will impact on young people, and I think there's a real understanding that we have a challenge in our country that, and it's come from decades of Westminster rule, Tory austerity, we know, affecting children and families in particular, that when we have had powers, and recently we have had powers of social security, we can do things with them. But there are other things that we can do that are very practical. And I think the free bus travel for young people, really important, was and will be this year for under 19s, but then extending that to under 22s, really important. And I think that thing about believing in our young people and having faith in them, of what they can be and what they can do, but acknowledging that this year will have brought many challenges. And one of the things I've been doing as the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy is looking at what we can do to support young people, particularly as they're leaving school, because the opportunities who really haven't been there for experience or the apprenticeships. We know that businesses would like to take on more apprenticeships, but apprentices, it's been challenging. So the £100 million that will be there to help as additional funding to our whole system for skills and education and training is the Young Person's Guarantee, that will guarantee every young person either an employment opportunity, a job, or training, or skills-based activity, or education, or also community activity, because we know that social enterprises, for example, and the voluntary sector are going to be a growing area and an opportunity to for people to get a job. And we were doing well. We were getting people signed up for that. We want to complete the job with that and get re-elected, and to make sure that we can drive that forward. But again, that's a value that we will not allow Scotland to go through what it did in the 1980s, as many people remember, with Thatcherism, where there was a generation of young people who became unemployed or never had an opportunity, who then themselves have had children, who then have also had children, in terms of that kind of generational cycle that you can get. And we are not going to allow our young people to suffer in the way that they did, that generation did in the 1980s. So I think that says a lot about the type of country we want to be. But also, I think, as your point is saying, is actually, it's not just saying it, it's doing it. And it's coming up with the policies and the very practical, meaningful things that will matter to families' income, and also, as importantly, the aspirations for young people. Because remember the baby box? I was in Finland, I looked at that early years before we came into government, the different things that were important there. And the point about the baby box, it is a huge statement of equality. And I think that's the point about values: equality at birth and right the way through.
And value at birth. I did a wee short video actually about the baby box, and I know at the time some of our opposition were poo-pooing it, which I felt was a ridiculous stance to take, because of the message you're giving by presenting the baby box. Every child in our society is of equal value. Every child is gifted the same box of love from Scotland to that child, regardless where it's come from. And I felt it was an extremely powerful message and so welcoming. You'll be the same. I remember, particularly when I had my first child, I had to scrabble together the free boots tokens to try and get the things I needed, because like most young couples, we had no money, and we were kind of really struggling to get by with me in maternity leave, and it was fantastic. So what I'd like to do is to talk in a wee bit more detail about some areas. You mentioned about the women's business centres, and not unsurprisingly, that's an area that jumped out at me. Are you able to give me a wee bit more information about that, about how it might work? Have you thought about any kind of structural planning around it?
Well, in terms of what we've been trying to do, Women's Enterprise Scotland have been very influential in shaping our approach over recent years, and what we have been doing, and this is not a new thing. We have been trying to support women in business for a long time, but I do think there needs to be a game changer on this, because that, if we're looking at gender equality in lots of different areas, the fact that only 20% of businesses are owned by women says a lot. And that's not because women aren't capable; they absolutely are. So there needs to be support in terms of those that are wanting to set up, giving them grant support in that period where they might not be earning, in that early stage. And that is a big aspect of our approach on entrepreneurialism and enterprise generally, is that challenge for those that just want to start up. And that's where the jobs and growth will come from in the future. And my concern would be that post-COVID, there is a reticence either for banks to invest in these companies, or how do we make sure we've got that step change. So for women, a lot of it can be mentoring, support, structural, but some of it will be supporting women, particularly in that first year when they're trying to set up, and to provide some kind of wage subsidy or some kind of, to allow them to stop their previous employment and start their business in that bridge area. So that's going to be one of the very practical things, again, that we're bringing forward. So I'm very pleased that to see that in the manifesto. And I think, again, it's about how do we tap into the unrealised potential of Scotland. In many ways, Scotland is that unrealised potential in so many different ways. But for women in business, I think that is something that we can very practically demonstrate, that we can, with some support, hopefully encourage more growth in that area.
and there's a couple of the things that jump out for me about that is I think that the way women have always had to run their lives, if they have children and if they have a career, is to multitask to the nth degree. I mean, both of us have been through that position, and I think this COVID pandemic has shown a lot of other people about how you maybe need to live your life in a different way, and people have been working at home, dipping into their work, doing a bit of family stuff, and obviously everyone's been involved in that, all kind of parents, and I think women are used to that, and it will be very, very helpful for them to get that support. The other point I was going to make as well was that it's been a concern of mine for some time to see how the banks react as we move forward. Now, we know the schemes that were set up in terms of CBILS and bounce back loans and so on, but for some time, based on the work that I still do supporting the all-party parliamentary group for fair business banking based out of Westminster, that once that initial period, particularly the kind of underwriting period by the UK government had passed, that then banks would start to want to de-risk, and actually it would turn them away from investing into entrepreneurial and what they perceive as higher risk businesses. But of course, we know investing in relatively innovation, for innovating in effect, is the way that we are going to drive out the pandemic. So I think you're quite right to have concerns about appetite for lending, particularly for small businesses, and you're bang on with that.
But we can't let the banks off the hook on this, and so therefore one of the pieces of work that I commissioned after our advisory group on economic reform and recovery delivered their report was pursuing the issues with the banks as well, because there has to be, and they acknowledge in my discussions I've had with them, a period of sort of a longer forbearance, because the banks have not suffered from this. In fact, their balances will be very, very strong at this point. So therefore, in terms of their interest as part of the everybody's collective interest, is to ensure businesses can keep trading and keeping trading, but not just trading to cope, trading to grow. And that's going to be the challenge, is to ensure can we transfer what are CBILS or those kind of loans into loans not just for survival, but loans then for growth. And particularly in Scotland's base, as you know, so many SMEs, so many family businesses that have traditionally not been in that space. And so therefore, this is going to be a key area of working with the financial institutions that we will want to take forward as part of that economic growth and recovery. Those dialogues, the dialogue, it continues with the banking economy forums, our different areas working with banks, but a lot of the decisions are made obviously in England and in terms of the headquarters staff there, but there's also a challenge for the UK, and that's where it's all very well for us to try and lobby and to try and persuade the UK government to do things with their CBILS loans, etc. But you're doing that one step removed. But it is about looking to encourage that enterprise entrepreneurs, and unfortunately there'll be challenges for some businesses. We know that, so when there's such a disruption, but it does sometimes provide opportunities for new starts in different areas. And one of the areas, though, that we do have to be very mindful of is, although currently women's levels of unemployment are not greater than men's, in fact, if anything, it's the other way around. More women are in those occupations that are furloughed and still furloughed. So when that starts rolling out in retail, in hospitality, in those areas, that's why we're going to have to try and have the National Transition Training Fund that we have, for example, that's in the manifesto, to help them move and pivot into different areas. And for example, we know in Glasgow there was a very good scheme that took retail staff and retrain them to work at Barclays in terms of finances. And these things we know can work. We just have to upscale them and make sure that they're happening elsewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, you make an important point as well about all change brings opportunity as well as difficulties, and therefore focusing on where the opportunities are. And you mentioned green jobs and hydrogen in particular, that both of us will know, I suspect, Dick Winchester from Writes for Energy Voice, who is consistently advocating hydrogen, and I'm sure he'll be delighted with what he saw in Paul Hughes' recent report and in the manifesto as well, the importance of hydrogen. And of course, as Michael Matheson made the comment last week, where we want to be in this sector is high up the value chain. As well. And so I think some of the ambition for that comes through from the manifesto. Now, there was another area I wanted to kind of explore a bit, and we'll probably look at some of the questions that are starting to come through, which is, you can imagine, as you commented, close to my heart, free musical instruction in schools, which of course is really John Swinney's kind of bag, but I'd appreciate your thoughts on that, and perhaps your thoughts about the kind of percentage for the Arts Fund as well.
So, I mean, it's been a pleasure to serve as the Culture Minister for over 10 years now, and I strongly believe in the power of culture and the power of music. And we have the Youth Music Initiative that's ensured that we've had a much expanded experience of music in primary. Everybody has that experience, but also groups like, for example, in my constituency, Whitburn Brass Band has been able to grow and develop using Youth Music Initiative for their trainer band. But today's announcement, and it was trailed early in the week, that there would be free music tuition for all, funded by the Scottish Government, I think is such a relief for so many people. Because here in West Lothian, you know, the SNP, when it ran the council, was clear that there should be free music tuition. And we've got a burgeoning music scene here. You know, I know my own son was in the Little Big Band, then the big band, in terms of the music that was carried out here. And for people who didn't necessarily want to take music as a qualification, you know, this was for everybody, because the teamwork, the sense of self-expression, etc. And we have got, you know, international and national stars, as you know, coming out of West Lothian as we speak. In fact, one of our local bands, the Snuts, as a debut album, has reached #1 in the UK chart. So it's continuing. We have Bog Hall and Bathgate Pipe Band. You know, I've already mentioned the Whitburn Brass Band. So I think having that free music tuition allows people and young people not to have that kind of burden of costs that many parents couldn't afford. And unfortunately, in recent years, West Lothian Council, which is Labour run, started introducing fees, and it was absolutely devastating, the number of young people then stopped music tuition. Now, and my worry is that's a bit of a lost number. They might not come back to this, and so I'm very keen that with this, and I've said to John Swinney, I'm very keen that those, particularly S1s and S2s, that over the last years get a chance, almost like an extra chance. And the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, we've had very good discussions with. They're working with a music education group, and there'll be further developments in this area. So hopefully, Michelle, from what I've told you, you'll be pleased that music is centre stage in the culture aspects. And I can talk about the percentage for the arts, but you know, you obviously may have a view on this, I'm sure.
I know. Could you tell? Yeah, for everybody that's listening, they may not be aware, but music's something I'm very keen on. I'm a graduate of what is now the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, but was the RSAMD when I went there. And I'm somebody who benefited from free clarinet tuition when I was at school. And I suppose, looking back, the music making I took part in school helped me develop social skills. Yeah. I think, looking back, I was a slightly awkward kid. I was quite shy. I didn't necessarily find it easy to communicate with people. I like to read books, and the sort of books I like to read were ones that other people didn't like to read. They thought I was a bit of I think the term for it when I was at school was a spov, because you know, I just was interested in history and so on, and it helped socialize me. And of course, it wasn't just the instrumental lessons, it was the groups that were able to form out of that. Yeah. And of course, you know, as an adult, I now know that the cognitive development in children of learning a musical instrument, it is scientifically proven the benefits it gives to allow your brain to develop. So there's huge benefits. And I also love the idea that it's our music, that everybody gets a chance to participate. And it's always been a great tradition in Scotland. I remember when I was at the Academy in Glasgow, we had, like, virtually all the string players came from a school in Glasgow at that point that was called Bellarmine. And they just were amazing. And that's what they did. And they didn't ask the question, well, what's the point in doing music? music was recognised for its contribution and its value in its own right. And if people ever say to me, well, what can you do with a music degree? I can always say, well, actually quite a lot. Because, you know, I've had quite a varied career. So I suppose the other thing that, thinking about it from a purely educational point of view, that strikes me, the other thing that was pre-trailed about allowing instrumental instructors, giving them an access path to GTC registration, that's very, very powerful. It gives flexibility to music departments, because these people are honours graduates from conservatoires. You know, they're highly skilled, highly qualified, and it gives a career progression for them as well. They're a recognised part of music departments. I thought that is game changing.
Yeah, so we've been working on that for some time, because that was always the issue and concern about who could do this. Now, clearly, in terms of qualifications in music and in terms of the teacher practice within that, that's recognised as obviously the qualified teaching aspects, but the music tuition, and it's jobs for musicians as well, remember, and in the conversations I've had, for example, with Nicola Bernadetti and others, is, you know, from her point of view, she says everybody should teach. You know, everybody, and whether, you know, and she's obviously doing it by example and has done so through the lockdown period. But I think that's the kind of point about those that are working in orchestras can also be music tutors that can also work with schools. And there's an obligation for everybody to grow the numbers, because the numbers we'll need for this will be extensive. So that's the kind of thing.
Exactly. Now, I think we maybe better take a couple of questions, because we've got so many tonight. Now, there's one that seems to be a bit of a kind of recurring theme. I suppose the question is, to what extent have all these policies been costed? So obviously, alas.
Yeah, so the policies are costed. In terms of the affordability for it, it's determined by what we anticipate Scotland's budget to be over the next period. The Fiscal Commission put forward their views as to what the income levels would be for the Scottish Government over a period. We put forward our financial medium-term strategy that was set out in January of this year. These are all public documents. And in terms of the anticipated increase in budget over the next period of the Parliament of 5 years, we anticipate that to be £6.5 billion. The costings within the manifesto is set forward is 6.1 billion, so it's actually coming in lighter than what we anticipate the income to be. The anticipated funds from our taxation base is anticipated to be 14%, which is actually more than what we expect from the allocations from the UK government. But, you know, this is all about showing what you can do within the limited resources that we have. In that we have some tax raising powers, but not, you know, by any means all of them, but also the block grant is the system we have just now. But, you know, even within those constraints, we can show how ambitious we can be. And if we can be ambitious under devolution with these policies, just imagine what a manifesto for an independent Scotland would look like as we go forward with a referendum to ensure we deliver independence. And it's not about how we get there, it's about why we want to be independent and what we can do with it. And this gives you an idea of what we can do, but imagine what further areas, in the areas that we have no responsibility for, we could do in these areas. And you talked about energy earlier on. I'm a big supporter of the hydrogen agenda. In fact, one of my last meetings as the External Affairs Secretary was with the German Environment Secretary, discussing both blue and green hydrogen opportunities in Scotland and our connection with them and their ability to work with us. But in energy, as you'll have discussed with Michael Matheson, we can do certain things, but of course there's a whole lot of areas between regulation, transmission, etc., that are challenging, because we know what we want to do, for example, with climate change, but we know what we want to do in housing, but regulation, transmission, all these other areas are reserved to Westminster. And, you know, we can really ratchet up our activity in this area had we those powers. But I hope I've given you an answer on the funding, but also on the ambition as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's an entirely reasonable answer you've given, that it's all costed, and it's costed against your projected budgets by a separate, the Growth Commission. I mean, you know, so you've not just made it up off the back of a fan.
It's not the Growth Commission, it's the Fiscal Commission's, projected, anticipated projection, yeah.
Yes, thank you for correcting me on that. And I mean, we've got some positive comments coming in here. Peter Meehan, hi Peter, how you doing? Hey guys, manifesto was stunning. Stephen Aitken head, great manifesto giving the children in Scotland a fair and equal start in life. We've talked about the money. Now we've got somebody here, I mean, we both might have a view in this. Hi Fiona, I live in central Edinburgh. I want to know if the Scottish Government are putting in a law to make sure that all private factors can be factored so that it would be easy for money for repairs to get done.
Okay, well, in Whistledown, we don't have many flats, so I'm not as familiar as constituency cases in the past in terms of flats, but obviously I know factoring is a real challenge. And Ben McPherson, who is has been the MSP and is now the candidate for Edinburgh North and Leith, he's been very active in this area as an MSP. And I know Kevin Stewart has also, as the housing minister, was looking at what could practically be done, because MD, and I used to live in, it was in Dalry, and had to deal with roof repairs, etc., and all those challenges in terms of how you can get things done. So I understand, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in this area, that things have happened, but the idea of how you can make that more, more readily available in terms of that, legal support for what factors can do. And it's the funding that goes with that, and the leverage, and how you can try and have pooled funding in those areas. It's going to be increasingly important, because remember, if we're tackling some of the issues around climate change, if you look at the centre of Edinburgh and if you look at the buildings, and we know that there are more pre-1919 buildings in Scotland and post-1919 buildings. So if we're serious about climate change and we're serious about what's happening in housing, then that's going to be an area that will be increasingly have to have attention on it. But I'm sure if you contact Angus Robertson, who's your candidate in Edinburgh Central, you might get a more comprehensive answer than I'll be able to give you at this point.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, Fiona, we can find out more about this. I mean, I moved out of Edinburgh about a year ago, where I lived for many, many years, and it was a huge issue there once the council-run scheme was stopped, particularly actually, as you point out, with the historical estate. And it's very important that these houses are maintained, not least of all from a safety point of view, never mind new flats as well. Right, now there are so many areas we're going to cover. We've got a lot of questions coming through, but we're going to give both Fiona and I's voices a little break, as we do traditionally now in this programme. One thing I would say to everybody is the other ones we've been doing, I've showed my crowdfunder video. I won't do that this evening. It has now closed, and I'd like to thank everyone who contributed to that. I was very, very touched by the positive messages I got in that. That was really kind. So this evening, we're going to show just my kind of standard red coat, as I've started calling it, video about why I hope that people will vote for me for the MSP for Falkirk East. So hopefully that will just be up in a minute or two now. My name is Michelle Thomson. I'm your SNP candidate for Falkirk East. This forthcoming election for Holyrood 2021 is the most important in my lifetime. Scotland stands on the cusp of change. Without change, and without the powers to make the changes we want to see, Scotland will be held back. We've been forcibly removed from the EU against our wishes. The COVID pandemic has exposed the cruel heartlessness of Westminster. The Tories knowingly and deliberately work against the interests of Scotland, whilst the Scottish branch office of the Labour Party will once again side with the Tories to stop Scotland's voice being heard. So this election is about choices, Scotland's choices. Choose the strongest candidate who will put Falkirk East on the map. Choose the candidate with a strong track record in speaking up for people who cannot speak up for themselves. Choose the candidate with a breadth of life, business and political experience. Choose the candidate who will focus on making things better, greener and more sustainable for you and your family. Choose self-determination. It's Scotland's future and it's Scotland's choice. Make that choice, Michelle Thomson, for Falkirk East.
I'm loving the drone footage in your films. I've been able to see some of them, and they're just really, really quite stunning.
Well, the question was, how do you get round the constituency when we were all subjected to very necessary and understandable restrictions? And that was a creative way of doing things. And I suppose we will pick up on something that's very dear to all of our hearts, I suspect, people listening. And I used to term in that video self-determination, which I will quite often do because I think it's at the heart and has more meaning to many people perhaps than independence, the concept and idea that we determine our own future. We take accountability and responsibility for determining our own future, rather than for some people an abstract kind of concept of independence, because it's putting us right back to ourselves. And I suppose, again, thinking about the manifesto, it's absolutely determining who we are, what we stand for, and so on. But in terms of independence then, we've got a question here from Maureen Scott. What is the plan on how to leave the Union should the Scottish people vote for another referendum? And she says that she'll certainly be voting to leave, as she believes being part of the Union is bad for Scotland. So what do you think about?
Well, in terms of the legislation, we have that ready. Remember, in terms of the referendum, we've got the referendum legislation already through the Parliament. We've published the Independence Bill. The First Minister has also been clear today, for those that haven't heard, is that we know that we are still in a COVID pandemic, and so therefore we will ensure that we hold that referendum once the crisis has come through. And I think that people, I know for those of us that are nationalists, and I've been an independence activist for well over 30 years, in fact probably over 35 years, I want independence as soon as I can, but I also know we've got to take people with us. And I think one of the important things to remember is this election is not just about electing a government, it's about growing the support for independence so that people can believe in what we're doing, because we're showing what we can, and we're demonstrating that in the manifesto, but we're bringing them with us on that journey to independence. I don't want to just it's not the process of how, it's the issue of what we do with independence and why we want it. And I think if we get fixated on processes, and processes are determined by politics, this is about politics. And the idea that we can somehow second guess anything else that's going to happen at this election, we make things happen. Just as much as you're talking about independence or self-determination is a choice for the people of Scotland. Scotland's future is Scotland's choice and nobody else's. What we're doing now is part of that process. So the more votes, obviously, the SNP achieve, and the popular vote does matter, and that's on both votes. But being able to be a majority government internationally, remember I spent 10 years as effectively Scotland's ambassador, as our External Affairs Secretary, and being able to hold our head as a majority government will be really, really critically important. And that means that if we can get the same number of votes on the regional list as we get on the constituency, vote, that allows us then to be in the strongest position that we can be. And I think that matters for international recognition. Interesting to use the word self-determination, that I think matters, I suppose, to individuals and how they see it. It's not necessarily the word or the determination that internationally is commonly used, and so therefore it's not a term that I was using in my international diplomacy work previously. It was about independence, but Scotland's position is absolutely uniquely understood within the European Union. You saw Donald Tusk's remarks, that emotionally there'll be great enthusiasm. We are quite unique in our positioning, everybody understands that. And how we go about getting independence is also important in how we will be treated by other countries as part of that. So when we put forward that independence bill, we're doing it on the basis that one of the important steps in becoming that independent state, we are an independent state in waiting just now, but to become that independent state is to have that international recognition. So something that's legally internationally recognised is absolutely essential within that. But don't underestimate the power of the politics. And anybody who's known, and you talked about history and studying history, independence movements, when they come to fruition, they can be a long haul, and for many of us it's been a long haul for a long time, but when it tips quickly. and it moves quickly. But in terms of our experience, 14 years in government, we are a known entity, both obviously to the people of Scotland increasingly, but also internationally, and that will stand us in good stead for that next step in terms of that recognition.
Well, I think that the manifesto is very, very clear about putting independence front and centre. It's absolutely clear about that, and about Scotland's future and Scotland's choice. And it'll be interesting to see how the opposition parties deal with the manifesto, given its ambition, given its breadth and its range. I mean, I listened to Anas Sarwar in Good Morning Scotland this morning, and I mean, he's still kind of taking the line of, in effect, no referendum ever again, ever. Which, of course, for people who came out of a Labour tradition and left the Labour Party because they perceived in 2014 that the Labour Party, faced with that choice, chose to align themselves with the Tories, I think that will continue to be a very awkward policy for them, that they've been stuck in kind of, you know, a kind of whirlpool ever since 2014. And I mean, I don't see them changing anytime soon, but
and they haven't had that reality check, you know. And for me to have won this seat in 2011, and for your predecessor Angus MacDonald, and I want to pay tribute to him and all his work and some of the joint work that we've done, particularly in the Gorge and other areas. But you know, for him to win the Falkirk East seat off Labour, that shift is not something that was temporary, and it was fairly fundamental. And I think there's a bit of denial from the opposition as to where things have gone. Now, remember, you know, I am of the view that, you know, yes, we're fighting an election, and everybody's, you know, will say things, and there will be, you know, fierce competition between different parties. Although this idea that the Tories and Labour just have given up, I mean, that's, how arrogant is that? Just, you know, not to fight to win, not to fight to become the government, or to try and become the first minister for their two leaders. I think that's a disrespect to democracy and the people of Scotland. The SNP, even when we weren't winning, and when, you know, we were not polling nearly as strongly as we are just now, we always fought to win, because you can only win if you believe you can do this. It's like, we'll only win independence if we believe we can be independent. And I think that's where I think people want to back winners. They don't want to back losers, and they've thrown in the towel. So who do you think has got the strong experience, one, to get us through COVID, but also to set a course for Scotland, and that independence course, I think is increasing, gaining in traction. But, you know, I don't want to just win by a couple of percent. I want to win, and win well. So we have to reach out. And I think you see the shifts, in some of it in demographics. You see it with young people, and the shift now, more women supporting independence than previously. But we've also got to face forward. There's always a temptation in politics to fight the last election, or fight the last referendum, and this it won't be and I actually don't like the phrase IndieRef 2. I think it's IndieRef new. It will be a new referendum in a new context, in a new time, and actually we need to make sure that we're in that position. And there are people that we still have to take with us, and some older people as well, particularly because we know that from the demographics. So how do we give them comfort and support? And I think Nicola Sturgeon has demonstrated to that demographic, particularly in how she's you know, supported and led the country through the COVID crisis. We haven't got everything right, we know that, but I think there's a level of trust that she will always put Scotland's interests first, and for that group of people who maybe hadn't thought about voting SNP before. And I'm picking that up a bit as you are. I'm not knocking doors, because West Lothian had a quite high level of infection, and you know, we're conscious if people can't see their families, I'm not sure how much they want somebody knocking their door. But as you said, you know, it's nice weather, people are chatting and volunteering and coming, and people who perhaps haven't voted before saying, do you know, Nicola Sturgeon stood up for us, we'll stand up for her.
Yeah, and I think people would generally agree, regardless of their politics, that the First Minister has put in a huge shift around COVID, and been a crosser brief, master of the detail of what's going on. And I think that has generally been recognised and conceded, regardless of people's politics. When you compare her with the shuffling gait of Boris Johnson, you know, I think the comparisons are easy to see. He appears disorganised and really quite chaotic. And I find people comment on that, even if they kind of preclude it with I don't like Nicola Sturgeon, but I have to concede. And I'm finding that with people who come from other kind of political parties as well. And that can only be a good thing. Okay, right now, other question. Oh, we've got, oh, and actually, before we go on to that, there's a question here from Stephen Aikenhead, which will cross over. What can be done regarding the upgrade to the Avon Gorge crossing in terms of timescale? And actually, I think things have moved a wee bit on that, haven't they?
Well, I mean, in terms of the preparation, in terms of the work that needs to be done, I know Falkirk Council, led by the SNP, have been very effective on their side of it. Of course, for those that don't realise, the Avon Gorge is the road that straddles between West Lothian and in my constituency, and the seat that Michelle's, we want her to win in the election. And as many will know, Martin Day, the MP, has campaigned for this for many years. Indeed, Manny Shinwell, the Labour MP from way back, had campaigned for it. Now, it was put into the infrastructure plan for the government, which I think was really important. I've taken as many transport ministers as I could over recent years to see it. It's the only green road in Scotland, because it would actually stop many trucks having to take that 40-mile kind of detour into Newbridge from Junction 4 or wherever that kind of that area into Newbridge to Grangemouth. So actually, it is the one that has green support as well in terms of getting it done. So the preparation work is there. We just have to make sure that West Lothian Council has the capital themselves to support the proposals that are there already from the Scottish Government to support that. I know Falkirk stands ready. So I know people saying almost have lost kind of hope as to whether this will get done, but actually I think in this parliamentary term we will see the Avon Gorge work taking place, and I think that will be a great tribute to many people, not least obviously Angus, your predecessor as well, Martin Day and others that have worked on this for many years.
Well, funnily enough, I spoke to Cecil Meiklejohn, who's the SNP leader of Falkirk Council, about this today, and she was optimistic for good reason. I'm not entirely sure I can share the good reason, but she certainly was optimistic. And I would certainly emphasise, Stephen, that this is an area that Falkirk Council, based on my dealings with them thus far, are really focusing on. So I hope that, you know, I don't want to say too much that perhaps I shouldn't, but certainly I
leave that to the leader of the council. I think it's her place to announce that if we've got, but that says hope as well.
I know. So now we've covered a lot of areas. A few other points that jumped out at me was the longer term ambitious planning as well. So people expect when you have election periods that there are baubles contained in a manifesto. They understand that, but what also impressed me was the sort of seismic shift. You know, for example, the National Infrastructure Academy. We know the benefits of infrastructure investment can have in the wider economy, and the fact that these are longer term ambitious things, obviously the additional money for the Scottish National Investment Bank, I view them very, very positively, and perhaps even more positively than short-term funding. It's showing that these are things that are going to continue to grow. And I personally was very pleased to see about the National Infrastructure Academy. And I wonder, was that deliberate to have this kind of mishmash of short-term and long-term, because we are laying foundations, economic foundations?
We've always done that as a government. Now, remember, in terms of being in government, I myself, Nicola Sturgeon and John Swinney are the only ones that are still at the cabinet table, that were at the cabinet table continuously since 2007. And in 2007, we thought we would be in 6 days or 6 weeks. You know, we didn't know how long we would be in, but we set out to have long-term ambitions, even though even at that point, you know, everybody was out to get us and to try and undermine us. So we've always taken a position right through that part of our responsibility to address that unrealised potential of Scotland is not just about short-termism, because I think that's a problem of many governments in many countries that can hold things back, and I think it was in the early days of devolution. But the work, and this is steady work, not just from Michael Matheson as the lead and as the Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, but as Economy Secretary, I was as involved in that, as was Rosanna Cunningham from the climate change aspect. So it's integrated view as to how do we make sure from a green jobs point of view, we have the infrastructure ambition, but also in terms of the funding support for that, and indeed the plans and the areas that we can invest in. So the housing aspects is fundamental, 100,000 new houses, but it's got to be integrated to that energy efficiency in terms of the low carbon aspects. And in terms of what we can do here in Linlithgow, there's a real ambition within this town where I live to make sure we can become a net zero town, and that means tackling retrofitting as well. Now, there's no reason in terms of heat pumps. We've got one of the biggest heat pumps manufacturers, for example, Mitsubishi, here in West Lothian. How do we integrate the supply chain and the supply chain, and then the delivery and the jobs, particularly for young people, have that in the seamless point of view? So the National Infrastructure Mission doesn't stand on its own. It's part of that delivery right across the different areas. But we know from an economic point of view, the more you invest in infrastructure, you do get the economic gain. So that is why there has been a particular emphasis on capital funding for that National Infrastructure Mission. And the Scottish National Investment Bank that I've been involved in the last year, again, is mission based. It is tackling some of the environmental aspects, but again, we know there's private investment that's available on the green agenda. So therefore, how does it make sure we can facilitate that, but not necessarily displace it, tackle some of the place agenda and the inequalities? So they're going to have some very interesting projects. But again, a lot of that is long-term patient capital, which quite often you don't get in governments that want to put up shiny immediate things that don't necessarily help the impact of what we need to do over the longer term.
Yeah, and again, just listening to you talk there, another thing that occurs to me, I remember, less so now, but people used to refer to Scotland as a small country. Actually, we know that it's a medium-sized country when you look at the sizes of countries. But I used to make the comment in the independence referendum, and it wasn't exactly a toe tapper, but it was sort of for business people, that shorter lines of governance usually led to better business outcomes. And I suppose if we look at that on a national level in Scotland, there is huge advantages in our scale, and therefore coordinating all these different pillars that you've described there, we can be more fleet of foot in dealing with the post-pandemic opportunities. And again, I think the manifesto demonstrates that. It's even different in its narrative. I felt watching that video there that my narrative felt a little bit, obviously I did it, some months ago, but the narrative is fresh and ambitious and audacious, and demonstrates through the kind of various different levers how fleet of foot we can be in Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right in terms of what inward investors are looking for example, is how you can connect between your enterprise with your academic world, and also other supply chains in particular. And I think that offer is something that I feel very strongly about in terms of my promotion. I've done a lot of trade promotion in my international work for the government over the last 10 years. And particularly on the health side, that was always an attraction, because the alliance that we have between our NHS and also our academic work, but also the enterprise area, has allowed and supported a burgeoning and growing life sciences sector, for example. So that's a key area. And I think some of that work, if you look at the manifesto, the National Pharmaceutical Agency is part of how do we mobilise and make the most out of billions of investment that goes into the manufacture and distribution, for example, in medicines. Now, back in March, Jean Freeman phoned me about trying to get access to supermarkets for those that were shielding. And I said, well, Fergus, you're dealing with that. But by the way, do you want help in procurement, particularly in the ventilation aspect? And she said, well, yes, if you could. And so therefore, then I think you've spoken to Ivan McKee, who's yes, one of my ministers in my team. And I said, right, okay, let's get onto this. And he did a fantastic job in doing that. And we're now self-sufficient in the PPE. Obviously, we always had a supply of it, but the cost of it was enormous, and it was costing more to import it as well. So sustainability and self-sufficiency can be applied in a number of areas. So procurement for me is going to be absolutely key in terms of how do we help generate sustainable jobs locally. The wellbeing economy is going to be very, very important as well. And also, how can we make sure that we look at the points of place and to make sure we use procurement intelligently in different areas. So these are all ideas that we can't wait to try and see if people vote for us, that the Scottish Government can progress should we be elected. And I know I'm conscious of time, so I probably should maybe not say as much and let you cover things.
No, not at all, not at all. I mean, genuinely, there is just so much to cover here. The last wee point of the things that jumped out at me, which I thought was a very clever and adept way of trying to, overcome the kind of the gaps between haves and have-nots, was a minimum income guarantee. I mean, there had been some talk, obviously, there's been a lot of talk about universal basic income, and people generally are interested in that, but most people won't necessarily appreciate the complexities and a variety of different ways you might achieve that outcome. So I was very interested to read about the minimum income guarantee, and also, again, creatively using what we are able to do, bearing in mind that there's so many things that we are not able to do because we don't have the control and power of it over it. And so I suppose your just last kind of couple of minutes of thought and thinking behind the minimum income guarantee.
So it's an area that's going to be really important in terms of raising standards. The more that people have in terms of their income, and living wage, for example, is again an aspect of what we've pursued. But also, if you look at the student side, because although I was the minister that abolished tuition fees, it doesn't mean that there isn't still debt for living costs. So therefore, that principle of a minimum income guarantee and looking at what we can try and do with students is really important. So you're raising that threshold in terms of the levels of income that people have that are disposable, because we also know that the more income that those at the lower end of the income spectrum have, they'll spend it locally in local businesses. So actually, it's an economic. There is an economic generator from it as well. But it's also about decency and values. And you started with the point at the beginning about a manifesto based on values. And we want to make sure that people have that level of a minimum income, that they can contribute to society as they are, but also get something back for it as well. And I think I think COVID has taught us anything. There's a collective self-interest in making sure that everybody is lifted up, as opposed to that dog eat dog world that we know is Westminster, whether it's Conservative or whether it's Conservative light from the Labour Party, as we've seen in the past as well. So that's the difference you get with the SNP.
I know. Well, I think that kind of probably brings us quite close to the end of where we are. We've probably got one or two wee questions just to finish it off. Now, there's a question here from Ronna MacDonald about the plight of the WASPy women. And of course, that reminds me that you and I briefly crossed over working in Standard Life. You were in marketing and I was in IT. Neither was in pensions, but I got to write some computer programming in pensions that a fate never to be repeated, thankfully. But what's your thoughts about the WASPy women? It may well be, I suspect not everyone listening is aware of what is reserved to Westminster and what is devolved to the Scottish Parliament. So I'm not sure if Ronna is.
So this is an area that the Scottish Parliament can do anything about, because it is in a Westminster area, and our MPs have been really strong in advocating the position of WASPy women and solutions as well. But again, that's about a kind of a sense of value and decency. And that again is a symptom of what Westminster can do and has done. And it's an area that is extremely frustrating. I want to have a parliament that could do something about the situation of WASPy women. And that's the frustrations of devolution, that unfortunately we haven't got those powers.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for explaining that to everyone that's listening. I mean, there are significant areas that reside with Westminster. And finishing off with what we said, I think probably one of the words of the night is values, because how we treat people who have contributed to our society throughout their life by not pulling the rug from them under their feet, as has happened with the WASPy women. I think that kind of value comes through in the manifesto. That is not what we would do. And I suppose my closing remarks before I announce who's going to be on Sunday is I genuinely am excited by the breadth, the depth, the scope and the ambition in the manifesto. So please do make that clear to everyone who was involved in the development of it. I really, there's much to read and much to congratulate. So just to finish off then, to say thank you so much for coming on. I mean, I feel as though we could have kept going for a wee while yet. There's just so much to cover, and thank you very much. What a fantastic career and contribution you've made, and I know you will be returned in your constituency. I've got a wee crystal ball here, and you'll manage to make a significant impact in the next Parliament. So thank you very much for coming on.
And best wishes to you, Michelle. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to, with voters, if they give us their support and their mandate, to be working with you in the Scottish Parliament.
Well, thank you very much. And just to finish off, everybody, on Sunday afternoon, we have Danish Ashraf and Ian Sinclair, who are both list candidates, and we are going to be talking to them about some of the structure, how it works with the list and so on, and their aspirations, and really what's hot on Sunday. So please tune in for that usual time, 3:30 till 4:30. And so I think that concludes this for this evening. See you then. Cheers. Bye.